All right, welcome to our Thursday night New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for today, June 8th, 2023 with David Krell. David has been a Zoom speaker in the past. Tonight he's going to be talking about his brand new book, Do You Believe in Magic? Baseball in America in the Groundbreaking Year of 1966. We're talking all about that season and also about the Giants' propensity in the 1960s to finish in second place. Just some housekeeping to make you aware. Next week, we have the fabulous Norm Coleman, Giant superfan. He'll be talking about his visits to ballparks and how they relate to the Giants. And then we have John Leo Nudikis, who's going to be talking about a lot of things, but specifically about his new Lefty O'Doul film project. Last night, I was honored to be asked to speak I was in San Francisco, not physically, but in the Gotham Club at Oracle Park. Rob Garrett gave a talk about his new book on Charles Stoneham, which he had shared with us. And I was like the only person on a Zoom, and I was featured on the screen. And after Rob spoke, they asked me to ask some questions about Rob about the book, and then I spoke about 10 minutes or so regarding our organization. I could have talked a lot more, but it was Rob's night, and I did not want to, step on his shoes. He's fantastic. I think everything was held and done appropriately. I was able to garner 5 more people for our organization. And one I did not know existed is on tonight, Kim Rupert, Jamie Rupert's sister. I had no idea Jamie even had a sister. So Kim, I know you're driving, but welcome aboard. You are Giant Legacy, and you're always welcome here. You know that.
Yeah, thanks very much.
You are so welcome. The other thing is one of the guys from Sabre is writing a book similar to Stu Thornley's book on the Polo Grounds, but it's all about Candlestick Park. And he sent me a link, and he, besides going to be speaking to Pat Gallagher and Will Clark, hopefully John Miller, he said, Gary, if you know anybody who would have great memories, and and if the memories are not, I went to a game and I wore a Parker. Okay, these are specific, ritual or whatever you did. I have that link. I sent it to a few of you. If I did not send you the link, it was not done intentionally. Very busy day I had today. So if anybody's interested in that, there's a good chance you would make the book if you write a good story there. So anybody has any questions about that when we're done, or just email me, hey Gary, I'd like to have that link to talk to the guy. So without further ado though, we bring you David Krell. David has, like I said, has spoken, I believe, 2 other times here. And this is yet another one of his great new books that he'll be speaking about. So why don't we give it all up to David Krell. David, welcome again, as always.
Thank you, Gary. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be with this group. I want to talk about 3 subjects. One is the culture of 1966. The second is baseball in 1966. And as Gary alluded to, the San Francisco Giants in the 1960s. The name of the book is Do You Believe in Magic? Baseball in America in the Groundbreaking Year of 1966. So what was so special? What was so groundbreaking? Well, culturally speaking, a lot of things were shifting. If you remember television and the landscape, you'll recall that not everything was in color. The Addams Family, first, all 2 seasons were black and white, 64 to 66. The Munsters, also 64 to 66. The Andy Griffith Show, first 5 years black and white. The Dick Van Dyke Show, all 5 years black and white. F Troop, the first season black and white. Batman premieres in January of 66, takes full advantage of the color technology in television. No one had ever seen anything like this. it really was a comic book on screen. What was interesting about the show, as you may recall, is that the kids liked the costumes and the chases and the Batmobile and the fights with the villains, but the adults got the joke. It was camp. It was parody. But the show, I believe, now as an adult and researching it and watching it for this book, rose and fell, but it didn't really fall, on the character actors who played the villains and villainesses. You had award-winning actors and actresses: Cesar Romero, Julie Newmar, Victor Buono, Art Carney, Tallulah Bankhead. It goes on and on and on. Burgess Meredith, one of the great character actors of the 20th century, played the Penguin. John Astin and Frank Gorshin both played the Riddler. So if you watch it, watch those actors' performances, because they really had to zero in and sell it. They really had to sell that they were these outlandish characters. That's not an easy thing to do. I saw Elizabeth Ashley in an interview once, and she said, doing a Tennessee Williams play is easy. Try doing a Love Boat. Try doing an episode of Hotel and making that believable. That's the test, because people think it's easy. It's not so easy. Just because it's more saccharine, more sugar-coated, doesn't mean it's any easier. So the other things that were groundbreaking, we had the first Black woman on the federal bench, and she figured prominently later in 2 baseball cases. Constance Baker Motley was nominated in January by LBJ, but because Republicans were playing political shenanigans, that the process got delayed until they were able to work something out. She becomes the first Black woman on the federal bench. She was alluded to by Justice Jackson. I don't know if that's the right phrase. She was mentioned by Justice Jackson, either in her testimony or in an interview. Judge Motley could have been a Supreme Court justice, but she never got that call. The two baseball cases that she figured prominently in later on, Melissa Lutgay, who you may remember, was a sports writer for a publication. She was denied access to the Yankee Stadium clubhouse, and Judge Motley basically said, either all reporters get in or no reporters get in. If you want to banish reporters and figure out some other way for them to access players, that's fine. But if one gets in, they all get in. And the other one was the Brooklyn Dodger bar and grill case. A tavern in Brooklyn called the Brooklyn Dodger had come under some scrutiny from the LA Dodgers and Major League Baseball in the late 80s and early 90s. So the Dodgers claimed trademark infringement. But as any trademark lawyer will tell you, there's a use it or lose it quality. And the LA Dodgers hadn't used the Brooklyn Dodgers mark in commerce to any significant degree, according to Judge Motley. And she also said, nobody is going to confuse this neighborhood tavern with a Major League Baseball team. It's so she found in favor of the bar. It's my belief, anecdotally anyway, that that's when teams got more invested in their legacies and heritages. The ABA is my favorite example. There are some ABA teams that are defunct, but the name is owned by the NBA. And you saw in the TV show Rock, you'll recall, there was a character, the main character, always wore a t-shirt with a Negro League team. So people got more interested in the past because I believe because of this case. I don't have any evidence for it, but there was a retro, a nostalgia boom going on in the 90s for sure. What other things were going on in '66 culturally? Well, Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Suzanne. Dolls does not refer to women. I found out, to my surprise, it refers to pills. It refers to depressants. This book was not salacious. This book was not titillating in its subject matter. These were multi-dimensional characters with whom you could identify, with whom you could show compassion. The character of Anne, I think, is so resonant. I was really rooting for her at the end. it's a wonderful beach read, and she covered topics that really weren't covered to this skill or this degree before. Drug abuse, body image, lesbianism, mental challenges. One character only has the mental capacity of a 7-year-old. The seedy side of Hollywood, the backstabbing that goes on, the deal making, the promises, the false promises. It really shows the underbelly. Jacqueline Suzanne knew that world. She knew people who ran in that world, and she used a lot of real life fodder for her book. The other bestseller that year that I want to focus on for a minute is The Source by James Michener. This is a sweeping docudrama that comes out 20 years after World War II ends, and it is a novel about the history of Judaism and Israel from ancient times all the way through the mid-60s, when the present day part of the book takes place at an archaeological project. And that's a sweeping book. It's a bear to read, but it's 1,000 pages in paperback. If you break that down to 20 pages a day, you'll be done in 2 months. Some other things that I just want to highlight about 66, you had the Beach Boys, you had the Beatles, you had I wouldn't say a clash, but you had a celebration of different music styles. You had folk, you had rock. Certainly the California sound with the Beach Boys was getting a lot of notice, and that's somewhat, it's in the book. It's not focused on it, a lot, but I did feel it necessary to mention the Beach Boys because Good Vibrations was such a powerful offering. So let's talk about baseball. Groundbreaking, a name that you may have heard of, Marvin Miller, a name that you might have argued belongs in the Hall of Fame. It took decades for that to be the case. Marvin Miller is celebrated as a man who changed the game because of his leadership with the players in the union, but it was not universal at the beginning. He came from a different industry. A lot of veterans looked at him askance. If you're a veteran pitcher with 7, 8, 10 years under your belt, you feel you have a pretty good rapport with the front office. You don't want some interloper coming in asking for the moon, and then the owner's going to say, well, I don't need these guys. I could get someone cheaper. I think it was Branch Rickey who said to a player who wanted more money, we finished in last place with you, we can finish in last place without you. So it took a while for Miller to get the acceptance from everybody. He listened. He didn't just come in and say, we want more money. He wanted to know about the quality of life. He wanted to know, if you go on a road trip and you come back on a Monday, do you play Monday night? Do you have a day's rest before you go back to your homestand? So that was really, really key to turning things around. And we know the Curt Flood story. Messersmith and McNally come after that. And I think it was Reggie Jackson, well, Catfish Hunter certainly, and then Reggie Jackson escalated free agency to an astronomical amount, both in New York. And I just want to make sure that people remembered him. So that's why he's mentioned in the book. Separately is Koufax Drysdale, the Koufax Drysdale combo and the holdout. Well, this is separate from Miller. These guys do this on their own. What happened was Don Drysdale tells a story to Roy Firestone that he was supposed to meet with Sandy Koufax for dinner. And he could tell by Koufax's posture and his expression, something was wrong. And what was wrong is that Buzzy Bavasi, the Dodgers GM, told Koufax something, and Drysdale said, well, he told me the same thing regarding salaries. So they combine forces. They're represented by an attorney. And this happens in late February, where they walk out. Now, I know I'm talking to Giants fans, but put yourselves in the shoes of Dodgers fans for a second. You have your two best players walking out. and it doesn't look like they're coming back. There's word of them going to be actors. There's word of a David Jansen movie. And this does not go on a couple of days or a couple of weeks. It goes on for a month. So for the Giants, imagine if it was Mays and McCovey who walked out, or Perry and Marichal who walked out. The problem for Bavasi was, well, if I give in to these guys, what happens when my 3 starting outfielders walk? What happens when a double play combination says we don't want we don't want what we're getting, we want more? The other faction that was really upset about this was the ownership across the National League, because Koufax and Drysdale mean people in the seats. If you're the Dodgers playing in Houston, in New York, in Philly, in San Francisco, in St. Louis, it's just a fact that 2 of the best pitchers in baseball are going to put people in those seats. And if you don't have them, your attendance will drop, your revenues will drop. So it was important for Bavasi to strike this deal for all of the National League. And finally they did, and it was none other than Chuck Connors, the actor, who intervened. Connors, you may recall, played for the Cubs organization and the Dodgers organization. He must have had a pipeline to both the management and the players, because there's a picture in the book. He's at the press conference announcing the détente, announcing the resolution, but he's not sitting in the front row. He's right there at the table with Koufax, Drysdale, and Bavasi. He's right there. So I thought that was a really neat epilogue to the story, that it was Chuck Connors who really saved the day for Dodgers fans. What else was going on in baseball? Well, the Orioles swept the Dodgers. Now, there's a 3-way pennant race that some of you may recall in September. You have the Dodgers, the Pirates, and the Giants. And going into October, it was still a toss-up. So the Dodgers clinched pretty much on the last day of the season, and they go into the World Series. Well, if you talk to Dodgers fans about the World Series, they'll probably say, my guys were tired. My guys were exhausted. There's a case to be made. The Orioles won in the 3rd week in September, and you all know that when that happens, you can rest your starters. Not every error is life and death. You can experiment. You can give a relief pitcher some more time that he didn't have before on the mound. The Dodgers didn't have that luxury. So they come in to game 1, and Dave McNally gets bounced around a little bit. So Hank Bauer calls up Mo Drabowski. Mo Drabowski was a journeyman. He was a starting pitcher, but in '66, they changed him to a reliever. He comes in fairly early in the game, and he sets a relief pitching strikeout record for a World Series game. And as a baseball card in '67 says, Mo mows him down. He didn't have a Hall of Fame career, but he sure had a Hall of Fame day. Now, there's a corollary to that tale. If you believe in karma, if you believe in the supernatural, if you believe in angels, then you may be reinforced by this part of the story. If you don't, it may nudge you a little towards curiosity. 7 years to the date that Mo Drabowski pitched that wonderful game, that wonderful display, 7 years to the date before, he lost a very close member of his family. That's chronicled in the book. I don't want to go too much into detail here, but suffice to say that there's a poem to the cadence of Casey at the Bat after the book ends, after the narrative of chapter 12 ends. Keep turning the page, because there's a poem documenting Mo's biography, that story, and I really encourage you to read it. It was a thrill for me to talk to Mo's family and learn that story. The minute I heard it, I said, I have to get that in here. That's the human interest part of baseball that I think we often miss, and I certainly didn't want to miss it. Koufax retires in November. It is to the consternation of Southern Californians, perhaps to the joy of Northern Californians, but he just said he couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't put his arm in ice. He couldn't get the shots. He just could not perform at that level. He had an extraordinary 5 years. Extraordinary. I mean, I know he was in the Dodgers organization since the mid-50s, but his dominance really came much later. And when you're talking about Cy Young awards and strikeouts and leading the majors in wins, when you're talking about 4 no-hitters, 1 perfect game, it's astonishing what he was able to accomplish in such a short period of time. Of course, that's the end of the Dodgers' dominance. They were resonant throughout the National League from the time of Jackie Robinson's rookie year, 1947, for the next 20 years or so. That started a downturn of sorts, and they didn't really get back to those levels of excellence until the mid-70s. So the Giants of the 60s. Excuse me. Well, I had talked about this before, and I think for somebody in this group who wants to take on a book project, or if you know someone who wants to take on a book project, I really think the Giants of the 60s would be a great topic to cover. As Gary said, they were in second place for the latter half of the 60s. You had great teams. You had the Cardinals, you had the Dodgers. The Giants had great teams too. I was looking up some stats. It always astonishes me how much Willie Mays was able to do, even at an advanced age. 35 years old is pretty old for a ball player, especially an outfielder. Maybe not a first baseman, and they didn't have the DH back then. But at 35 in 1966, I mean, check this out. He doesn't hit 300, but he knocks in 103 runs, knocks the ball over the fence 37 times, 29 doubles, which means he needs speed. That's extraordinary. On top of that, Koufax and Drysdale overshadow the Giants because Juan Marichal goes 25-6. That's one of the best winning percentages ever. Of course, you have Gaylord Perry at 21-8. And if I'm reading this correctly, Lindy McDaniel had some opportunities as a relief pitcher. He goes 10-5. I think that the Giants of the 60s really get overshadowed because of the Dodgers dominance, but also Bob Gibson in the World Series, his fantastic year in 68. You have the Miracle Mets. That's more of a romantic tale. I think anyone in the room will back me up. I don't think the Mets were dominant in 69, as at least they weren't as dominant as the Cardinals were in their 2 tries at the World Series. I think that there's just a lot that happens. It kind of reminds me of things like Elston Howard or Whitey Ford, who get eclipsed by Mantle and Maris in 61. This really, for Sabre people, for the people in this group, it's so important that we keep this going, to have these discussions, because what we do is we uncover unsung heroes, and we don't let the light go out on McCovey, on Marichal, on Gaylord Perry, on some of these great players. We're in danger of losing that. And then I realize every time I get the Baseball Research Journal, we're really not in danger. I just came from the Cooperstown Symposium on Baseball and American Culture. And you guys know, what do you do at a conference? You talk at lunch, you talk at dinner, you talk before the town ball game, before the banquet at the Hall of Fame. Same thing at Sabre Conference. You're talking baseball all day long, not just in the sessions, but outside the sessions. And groups like this one it's just so impressive, the amount of people that you continue to get. And I'm not only privileged, I'm proud to be a part of it. With that, I will turn it over to Gary, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
Dave, fabulous. Again, the book, what's the best way to get it, Dave?
Amazon.
Amazon?
Yeah, Amazon will get it to you faster.
All right, I'm gonna make I got a question, but I got a few comments. I want to
Okay.
hear your thoughts. They better be correct, by the way. Munsters or Addams Family?
Munsters.
All right, 1 for 1. Genie or Bewitched?
That's a tough one, because when I was a kid, it was Genie. Bewitched seemed too sophisticated. And then I started to realize as an adult, the fantasy is this beautiful blonde buxom genie who calls Tony Nelson master, but every time he tells her to do something, she doesn't do it. Every time he tells her not to do something, she does it. So I don't know. I might have to go. It's a tie. It's a toss up. I'm going to plead the fifth on that one.
Well, I'll take a Genie, but as far as Bewitched goes, first Darren or second Darren, you better be good with this one.
I'm going with second Darren.
Really?
Yeah,
I'm
going
not
with
buying
second
the book
Darren.
now. Come on. All right, I got what, Genie or I'm sorry, Ginger.
Oh,
Or
by the way, wait, one sports aside regarding Bewitched, if you recall the movie Brian's Song,
Oh, yeah, I
a
remember that.
scene takes place in the Stevens's living room. I think it's supposed to be the house of Gale Sayers and his wife,
Ginger or Marianne?
Marianne.
Oh boy. And lastly, Julie Newmar is Catwoman. And I'll
Julie
end it at
Newmar,
that.
Catwoman, and Adam West is Batman. Any
That's
generation
exactly
Xer or baby boomer will tell you we respect Michael Keaton and Christian Bale and anyone else, but it's kind of tough to top what your childhood. And again, Ginger, yeah, when you're a kid, it's Ginger. As an adult, it's Marianne. And I met Dawn Wells at a nostalgia convention. I was so sad to see her pass away. She was such a lovely woman. She was really so gracious to the fans. People show up at these conventions. They really, they get as much of a kick out of it as we do.
Last, now baseball wise, I believe 66, the Giants traded Cepeda for
Yeah.
Ray Sadecki. Your thoughts on that? And
Oh,
I know
gosh.
Giant fans were just bonkers.
I'm not as well versed as the people in this room, but Cepeda is one of those unsung heroes. I think he gets overshadowed by Mays and McCovey in Giants lore. It's the kind of a thing where I had a book when I was a kid called Unsung Heroes of the Major Leagues. Random House had all these different baseball books for school kids. And I think Cepeda would belong in that category because he just doesn't get, Tony Oliva from Minnesota doesn't get enough notice as well.
And lastly, the title. I know it's not from the song, correct? The song was
Well,
released.
yeah, the song came out and it was
65,
popular that
right?
year. So it's 66. It was popular as well. So
Right.
it's a play on the song, but it's also a play on, it was a magical year. It was this wonderful year where so many things were going on. And for Baltimore to take down the Dodgers, when you had stuff in the culture that I mentioned, it was just a fantastic time. And I'm a pop culture guy, so to research this was really, really a lot of fun.
I love that stuff. So thanks for answering my question. Before I go to Mars, I thought I saw Dan Dooley with the question. I could be wrong. Dan, did you have your hand up? No, okay. David German, then Mars, then Bill Klink. Dave, you're up.
Okay. So I just wanted to make a few comments. When
Yeah.
I think of 1966, I think of the fact that that was the worst year in the history of New York sports. And I put in the chat
Yeah.
all of the records of the New York teams. It was an abysmal year. And that
Yeah.
happened to be the first year that I actually became a sports fan. My first ever basketball game was the Knicks Sixers at the Garden. Then I went to a Yankee doubleheader that year. So it's an amazing year in an awful way for New York sports. But I wanted to mention that in terms of music, I'm glad you mentioned about the Beach Boys and the Beatles in there, because Pet Sounds was released by the Beach Boys that year, and many people consider it one of the greatest albums of all time. It was a tremendous musical transformation for the band, which led up to Good Vibrations. And Revolver came out by the Beatles,
Right.
which if Revolver doesn't get recorded, you don't have a Sgt. Pepper. So such an important year for music as well. So I'm glad you touch on that.
You
in
also
the
had the
book.
Monkees.
Pet
The
Sounds
Monkees
was
came out in
the
'66.
transformation
Right.
of the Beach Boys.
Right.
Exactly. I saw also you had talked at another conversation about the Orioles, and a lot of people and that '66 team, and a lot of people say, "Oh my gosh, what an upset!" But to me, I look at that as that was the beginning of an incredible dynasty.
Yeah.
That team was '66; they win it. That same line at '69, they probably should have beat the Mets. They were clearly the better team, but the Mets upset them. They win it in '70. '71, they blow a 3-1 lead
Yeah.
to the Pirates. Should have won it in '71, and they were great all the way up till the mid '70s with that lineup. So '66 was really the beginning of the greatness of the Baltimore Orioles.
I agree.
But what I wanted to ask is this: '66 is also an important year from the standpoint of college sports. You have what many people call the game of the century, that tie between Michigan State and Notre Dame.
Right.
And then also, of course, the Texas Western upset of Kentucky, the first time you had an all-black starting five. I've ordered the book. I very much look forward to reading it. Do you touch on either of those in the book?
I don't, and I have to give a caveat here, because what I'm hearing in the publishing industry is that publishers want their writers to write less if possible, because the cost of paper is skyrocketing. So the book got cut down considerably. There's a lot of stuff that didn't make it. There's a lot of stuff about topics that are already in there that didn't make it. Caesar's Palace debuted that year. I have quite a bit. I had even more, but for space concerns, we had to cut stuff out. Same thing with the chapter about television. We had Star Trek and Mission Impossible premiere that year. I had to cut out quite a bit about that. So we really had to make a decision on what we could and could not cover. So I didn't cover the college sports. And regarding the Texas Western thing, I saw the movie. I think there was a book. I don't know how much value I would add to that story other than to summarize it. So I just kept it more about baseball and the culture, things like the space race. Vietnam is mentioned towards the end a little bit because we weren't escalating yet, but it was resonant enough that I put it at the end.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Mars, you're up.
Well, thank you, Dave, for joining us. I'll start off by saying, fortunately, I'll be 76 this summer. So I saw the Giants in New York. And the question I have that about Chuck Connor's influence on the game that you mentioned earlier, if you could reiterate on that. But I want you to say why the Giants finished in second place for so many consecutive years. And following that, and part of that was due to the recreation of Les Kiter. Or games that were televised. This is the scenario with Koufax and Drysdale. Maury Wills would lead off with a walk or infield single or a regular single, and then he steals second. Willie Davis would hit a ground ball to advance Wills to third, and then Tommy Davis may hit a fly ball to score Wills, and Koufax and Drysdale would win the game 1-0 over the Giants and all these other teams. They basically were the hitless wonders. And I witnessed this. You know, when I saw Koufax pitch for the Brooklyn Dodgers, he got junk time. He couldn't get the ball over the plate. So as you mentioned earlier, as we know, he really developed in the early 60s and became the great pitcher that he was. You know, so the The other thing about Marvin Miller, it was good with the intention in the beginning, but it turned out to blow out of proportion with what players actually get today. And we're seeing with all the expansion, we see a weakening of the major leagues. And if there's further expansion, there'll be further weakening of this game. And it's already been proven, and even teams that built new ballparks don't draw. So the first thing I would like you to address is Chuck Connors. Thank you.
Well, from what I understand, he was close with both the management and the players, and he could talk their language. He played at the professional level, at the major league level. It wasn't a long career at the major league level, but enough so that he knew these guys. And Burt Reynolds has been well, he passed, but I've seen interviews of him when he did the football movie Semi Tough, and he was able to talk to the players and I don't want to say perform the stunts, but perform the plays that you see in the movie. Maybe not 100%, but he was able to do it at least some of the time. When you have actors who have that pipeline, there's a certain amount of integrity. And also, I have to imagine that if he made a call, he probably talked about things like image, because when you're an actor, you're very conscious of your image. And what's your image going to be if you really walk off for good? Do you really want an acting career? Are you really not going to play? I don't recall reading too much about other teams offering money, saying, hey, if they leave the Dodgers, we'll give them money. And it's funny, the one person who was used as the barometer was Willie Mays. At that time, reportedly the highest paid player in baseball, and I believe it was $125,000 a year. But absent seeing the contract, we don't really know exactly how much he made. But there were reports that he was the highest paid.
Thank you, David. Now, as far as the second place finishes, it's my belief, because Koufax and Drysdale, and later on Claude Osteen, basically they could score one run and win a game. And that, to me, even though the Giants had a decent pitching staff with Marichal, Jack Stanford, Billy Pierce, Billy O'Dell, they still couldn't overcome the great pitching staff of the Dodgers. Right. What is your elaboration on that?
I would have to do a Talmudic analysis, almost a Moneyball analysis of the teams in those years. But I think it's what you said. If Drysdale and Koufax were powerful enough, or Gibson with the Cardinals powerful enough, Seaver later on with the Mets, to keep the Giants at bay, and terrific hitters. I mean, a 1-0 win is very impressive. Maybe not offensively, but certainly defensively. If you're keeping people like Mays and McCovey at bay, and the rest of the offense, the utility players, that's an extraordinary feat.
Well, thank you, Dave. Thanks for your insight.
Lars.
Thank you.
Mr. Klink, you're up.
I'll keep my two comments brief, yielding most of my time to the esteemed Mr. Taylor and, of course, to others, but and to Howard there, right next to me. Real quickly, in terms of what I like about this book, I think why I want to get this is it isn't just a baseball book. It needs the culture. That's something that's lacking in an awful lot of books. You know, I only need so many statistics. I only need so much of this. Dan has weaved the culture in many of his books, and I'm looking forward to this. One cultural icon that I thought he died that year. It may have been 67. I mean, he's right up there on the Walk of Hollywood, and that's Walt Disney. Didn't he die that year?
Yeah, he did. I believe Buster Keaton did as well.
Walt was, did everything. We all remember. I'm kind of strange, I guess, on this. We all remember where we were when Kennedy died.
Right.
I was driving around in a car with my girlfriend from high school when I heard that Disney had died. And
Yeah.
I don't know, that always, I never brought that up with my mother. Okay, enough of that. She hated the girl. Okay, she's glad I didn't marry her. Okay, enough of that. One guy you mentioned who, when he left the Giants, his stock skyrocketed, and that's Orlando Cepeda.
Hmm.
I regularly read, for any number of reasons, the Cardinal magazine, and I will tell you, the St. Louis Cardinals, fans, front office, everybody, he's in their Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
He walks on water. What
Yeah.
he did in 67 and 68, they wouldn't have won it. Well, they didn't win it in 68, but they won it in 67, on the back of him. He is just beloved in St.
Yeah.
Louis. He doesn't make a big deal of that because he's affiliated with the Giants, but they love him there. Did you get that feeling? Did you get that backstory at all?
I don't know enough about Cepeda's biography and the avenue that you're talking about, but having grown up in the New York area in northern New Jersey, it seems to me that Reggie Jackson had a similar effect, that Yankees fans revere him. I don't really see too much scholarship about the 70s A's and the A's fans revering Reggie. And he was with the Yankees for half the time.
Yeah.
And he went into the Hall of Fame as a Yankee.
Yeah. Well, I know that, he was injured for, correct me, was it the 72 series? He had a foot injury, I remember. And so, he didn't have the effect in those series that he nobody did in 77 like
Right.
that series, but the effects he had with the Yankees were much bigger than with that. And he also had a bunch of teammates that in some ways overshadowed him.
But I
Very
think
much,
that,
Dave. I'm looking forward to reading this thing.
thank you. But I think that happens throughout. I mean, are Angels fans so revering of Nolan Ryan, or is it more Astros and Rangers fans because he's from Texas? That's an interesting approach. I hadn't thought about that. That's really interesting.
Thank you, Bill. Howard, you're up. Mars, no smoking.
How you doing, Dave?
Hey,
The last couple of years, I've read a couple of books on specific years. One of them I really hated. It was the Sputnik season.
yeah.
About the 57 Yankees. First of all,
Yeah.
I despise the Yankees. But what I really didn't like about the style of the book was that Noel spent too much time talking about individual games and individual innings and individual at bats. I threw the book out. I couldn't finish it. I mean, I enjoyed the thing about what happened to Yogi, the fight at the Casablanca, whatever. But for the most part, I hated the book. I think he says Sputnik for the very end. And I barely remember that. I was a couple of years old. Well, more than a couple, I was like 6 or 7. But the book that I really liked, you might recognize it. This is yours, right? 1962.
That's
I
mine.
read this. I've kept it.
Thank you.
62, I was
Thank you.
younger than I was, than 66. 66, I was 13. 62, I was 9. But I have so many memories, not only of the Giants, who, of course, it was bittersweet. They won the pennant in the playoff, and then they lost on that Bobby Richardson lucky catch in the World Series. But I remember so many of the cultural things that you wrote about. John Glenn, the TV shows, off the top of my head, shows like, I don't know, Leave It to Beaver and,
Right.
and Ozzie and Harriet, and some of the other things you wrote about. Marilyn Monroe, you probably mentioned in here. That was the year that she died. I was only 9, and this book made such a great impression on me. And I think it will have made more of an impression on me than I will get from reading the 66 book. 66, I was already in junior high.
Yeah.
To me, Vietnam was coming on. I've been through a couple of assassinations, and I was really down on that year. And I'm surprised nobody mentioned tonight about the Orioles. That was the year they got Frank Robinson, the old 30-year-old that was discarded from Cincinnati, which really started the dynasty. Brooks was already there. Some of the others were there. So I'm going to get 66. I'll read about it. But 62, my last full year living in the Bronx, just a few blocks of Yankee Stadium, and we all hated we were New York Giants / San Francisco Giant fans. So I want to congratulate you. 2 years after I read
Thank
this
you.
book. I'm surprised nobody else mentioned it tonight. It never even came up. I guess you were too much concentrating on 66. But 62 was a magical year for me. I think for the country. You know, we had things like the Cuban Missile Crisis. But the Giants won the pennant, and they should have won the series too. So thank you for that, and thank you for being here tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. The man with the dulcet tone, Mr. Taylor.
Dan,
David, it's great to see you.
Likewise.
Congratulations, terrific
you.
book. You guys, if you haven't ordered it yet, you're going to really enjoy it. He did a terrific job on it. Nice presentation tonight. My quick question for you, which did you enjoy more, the research or the writing?
oh, the research. Without a doubt. I mean, when I interviewed you for the PBBC, which is now defunct, the Pandemic Baseball Book Club, I think you said the same thing. It's like time travel.
Yeah.
I was able to get through interlibrary loan, the LA Herald Examiner. One of the things that, I mean, Dan will tell you, you have to cover all bases, no pun intended. So I can get the LA Times through newspapers.com. I can get it through ProQuest, but the LA Herald Examiner is defunct. It's not digitized. And I had to fill out the form at the New York Public Library to see if an archive or a library or university would release it. And there was an archive in Chicago, thankfully, that released the Herald Examiner. And the reason I wanted both LA papers is because I knew that they would cover the holdout differently. And one might have a salary figure and the other would have a different salary figure. One might have 3 quotes, the other would have 4 quotes. The World Series could be covered differently. The Herald Examiner had a columnist, Mlb'S, who seems to be a West Coast equivalent of Dick Young. He was very acidic in some of his columns, very critical of the Dodgers. So I very much enjoy the research, the organizing, the categorizing, relabeling everything so that when you have everything relabeled, you can find it at a moment's notice.
That's the crazy part, getting it organized so you can find
Yep.
things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
Well-
part of the process.
Well, terrific presentation tonight. Congratulations on the book. You did a great job, and it's good to see you again.
Thank you. And may I give a plug for Dan's book about the Hollywood stars, Lights, Camera, Fastball. If you have not read it, it is a great summer read.
Thanks.
And it takes you back to a time when Hollywood was a lot smaller. It really had a small town feel rather than the Metroplex, which is the word that Dan uses, that it became because of the defense industry and commerce and the freeways, et cetera.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Last night I had a Cobb salad when I was out. It was on the menu. Anytime there's a Cobb salad, I order it. And I
Cobb
also
Cobb.
tell the waitress the story behind the Cobb salad.
Dave, before we go to Steve, is there another year in focus in the future?
Yes, I'm working on a book right now about 1978.
Perfect. Mr.
Donna-
Rothschild, you're up.
Donna Summer, Disco, Happy Days, Mork from Ork, Coming Home, Grease, the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, and you know the rest, the Bucky Dent home run, the Yankees over the Dodgers again, and Tom Seaver's no-hitter, a lot of other wonderful stuff happening in baseball that year.
Sounds
What
good.
about the book on Mlb'S?
I'm working on that simultaneously.
What a guy.
Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, great presentation, David. Always a pleasure to
Thank
hear you. Good topic. Yeah, Dan Taylor, that book was good, and his most recent one on the scandal of 1926 is amazing. And I'm looking for, we heard it. It's just amazing. But my comment is basically for Dave German, who opened up the Texas Western deal in 1966. You know, that was if you think back, that was a follow-up, and Harvey, I think, will agree, to the CCNY deal with the point shaving, when they also whiplashed Kentucky, and Holman started 4 blocks instead of the usual 3 that night,
Right.
because of Adolph Rupp. But Dave German, I'm not sure if you realize this, and I think he might still be there. Willie Worsley ended up coaching Spring Valley High School, certainly until 3 or 4 years ago. he's got a little book out on his trail from Clinton to Texas Western, and he came from the South. I tried to get him in on a Zoom call. It didn't work. Some guys just don't want to do it. But I think he might still be at Spring Valley High School, Dave German. So you might want to check it out. Thank you, David. Both
Thank
David.
you.
Thank you, Steve. Coach Bob Mayer, you're up.
Yeah, Dave, thank you very much. We loved your presentation.
Thank you.
I have to criticize you about Orlando Cepeda. Two parts. At the beginning of his career, rather than Mays and McCovey hiding his popularity, it was the other way around. Cepeda at first was more popular than Mays. Secondly, why was he traded, Cepeda? Because a friend of mine was very close with Johnny Orsino. I believe might have been their second string catcher. The reason that Cepeda was traded was monkey business with one of the other Giants' wives. And that was it. Management said, "You're gone, Cepeda." That's it. Thank you very much.
When I'm talking about popularity, I'm just talking globally over time, because if you're talking about Mays and McCovey, people generally will say, "Oh, I remember those guys." But if I'm talking to people Generation X and I mentioned Cepeda, like what team did he play for? So a lot of it's generational,
Yes.
but it's also unfair. I mean, Mays is an icon, so you can't really compare too many people with Willie Mays or even Willie Mack.
Yeah, the fact that he came from New York also made Mays a little below Cepeda popularity-wise.
Yeah.
Thank you, Coach. Andy McHugh, you're up. Andy, are you there? There you go.
I'm there. I was muted. I had to realize what was going on. I just wanted to make one quick comment with Dave. Dave, good to see you. And the book is truly very good. I did want to make a comment about the Los Angeles papers, in that the basic Dodger reporter was a guy named Bob Hunter, who had just incredible sources within the Dodger organization and would beat the Times regularly. And I think that makes your decision to really look at both newspapers a really good one.
Thank you.
The second thing I'd say, and this is very much from the point of view of a Los Angeles fan who graduated from high school in 1966. And it was my feeling that the Dodgers could consistently outplay the Giants in those years because they had better, I'm going to call them baseball players because that's unfair. But it's guys like Gilliam and Wills who played up the middle of the field, were very intelligent players, very adaptable players. And whereas the Giants had all the big names and the big hitters, they often didn't have guys who knew how to play the kind of intricacies and nuances of the game that people like Gilliam and Wills did. And, Drysdale and Koufax and Osteen were great, but so were Marichal and Perry.
Yeah.
The Giants clearly had the edge in amongst their outfielders and corner players. And I think it was the up the middle players, Roseboro, Wills, Gilliam, as opposed to, you're going to have to dig a minute before you come up with the Chuck Hillers of the world. They just didn't measure out. That was very much of an LA point of view, I must say, but it was a strong one at the time.
Let me
Good
also,
point.
Let me also just quickly thank Andy and Dan for giving blurbs for the book that are on Amazon.
That was a good point. The Giants weren't as good defensively. Plus the Dodgers had they had Koufax and Drysdale. That was a good point.
Does anybody else have a question who has not spoken yet, Dave, and would like to, whether by raising hand or using the yellow hand?
Well, I should say I commend you, Dave, for all your research.
Thank you.
There's with writers, if you're writing about the Civil War, and obviously we weren't there, or the Revolutionary War. That takes a lot of research. There's so many people you go to interview, and many of those people that you would want to interview are no longer alive.
Yeah.
So when you get different viewpoints, like from sports writers,
Mm-hmm.
that opinions could vary greatly.
Yeah,
It's a consensus that a writer must get to try to get the most accurate story. And so I commend you for all that. Thank you, Dave.
thank you. Thank you.
Listen, Dave, hopefully we'll see you soon. Again, the book, Do You Believe in Magic? Sorry, I only have a paper here. I don't have the book yet. Amazon, best way to get it. And hopefully,
Absolutely.
when is this 78 book coming out?
I don't know. I'm hoping 2025, and I'm hoping the Bo Belinsky book comes out at that time as well. Next year, possibly, I have a book about the Boston Red Sox, which is really a cultural history of the team.
I know Paul Ellis Graham's here. He's a giant and a Red Sox fan, so you got one buyer right there. So
Well, it's things like Bill Buckner's redemption on Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So
That's true. Remember that.
the Red
Yep.
Sox in movies is a chapter.
Oh, good.
Steve, you have a question, Steve?
Yeah, David,
Yeah.
I'm not sure I told you this. Manny Ramirez was one of my students
Oh.
when he first came to the States. I was probably his first kind of American experience as a sixth grader at my school. So if you ever want to chat a little bit about the early Manny
Absolutely.
Ramirez, I can give you some good stories.
I guess you didn't teach him how to speak English, though. Correct, Steve?
He speaks English very well now. Don't be a Weisenheimer.
Let's all give it up for David Krell.
All
Thank you,
right.
Dave. Thank you.
Dave, great
you,
seeing you
everyone.
again. And hopefully we'll talk soon, okay?
You bet. Take care. Be well.
Take care, everybody. I will hang around here for a while. Next week, we have Norm Coleman. It will be a Wednesday event. It'll also be
All right,
Big
Norm.
It'll be Big Norm's 50th birthday, so we'll celebrate with him. But we'll see you guys next week. I'll hang around talking Giant baseball. Good night, everybody.
Right.
Good night. Thank you, Gary.
Where's Goldfarb?
He's
I'm
here.
here.
Your buddy's doing good in Toronto.